In the next 30 minutes, grim outlook for Ghana's economy as government business in Parliament hits a stalemate for weeks now, with a risk of no 2025 first quarter budget presentation with 29 days to Ghana's general elections. Tonight, we're asking that question: what is the implication for the Ghanaian economy and the business community?
So I am very disappointed at this particular.
Approval ought to be given by the 31st December, but we should not push ourselves to that end. It's not only a tool to enable government to withdraw from the consolidated fund, it's also a signal to the economy, to the markets, in terms of the direction that government is going.
But there's more drama unfolding in Parliament. We have all that wrapped up for you. Details as the majority MPs condemned the behavior of their colleagues in the spectacle that unfolded in the last few hours.
So I am very disappointed at the spectacle that we are seeing. We need to consider the enterprise Ghana first. What is it that would be in the interest of the country that we need to pursue? And for us, we are behaving as school children.
And this is Top Story. Top Story, as always, is brought to you by Telecel, connecting energies, holy insecticide sprays and coil. Enjoy a holy sleep. My name is Blessed Suga, and grave implications. That's the summary of what's likely to happen to Ghana's economy as government business in Parliament has been in a stalemate for weeks now. Both sides of the House have been at each other over who constitutes the majority in Parliament since Speaker Albert Bagbin declared the 4 seats in Parliament vacant. Now, this situation, as we all know, has led to 3 separate emergency recalls and also, as we know it, the indefinite adjournment with a 4th currently on its way. The House, as we know, has not been able to execute any meaningful business in the last few weeks. A serious government business, including the 2025 first quarter budget presentation, in limbo now, with just 29 days to the general elections. So I want you to, first of all, listen to NPP MP for Asante Atim North, Andy Piakubi, who's been expressing some level of disappointment with his colleagues for the fights and spectacle that we've been seeing in Parliament over the last few days.
So I am very disappointed at the spectacle that we are seeing. We need to consider the enterprise Ghana first. What is it that would be in the interest of the country that we need to pursue? And for us, we are behaving as school children who are fighting over seats or fighting over sides of the teacher. These things are not necessary.
But do you tell your colleagues these things?
No, I tell everybody. I don't have to. I'm very disappointed with the total behavior of Parliament. I'm very disappointed. And I'm wondering, could it have been better? Why this? You understand? So we call ourselves honorable. What we are doing is honorable enough. And when we go to Parliament, we leave. Instead of conducting business, this one is saying that, this one is saying that. I'm indicting the whole House, both sides. And
are you willing to sit on the minority side?
I'm disappointed. If we vote and we come out to be minority, people have sat on the minority side before. Mm-hmm. In fact, my colleagues who were in the 5th Parliament and 6th Parliament, they were in a minority, they sat there. What changed? We'll come to this majority side because you are in the majority. And being in the majority is by way of numbers.
True.
And indeed, if you look at the Constitution, and if you read the 97, particularly read from the beginning of 97-1. You say in Parliament, in Parliament, there. If you change whilst you are there, it's not futuristic. So this one, we shouldn't even waste too much time. I'm telling you that I was so disappointed with the ruling of Professor Okoye, and I have always condemned it. But that doesn't mean that we have to continue to be belaboring the point. So we are past that. If today, members of Parliament tender their resignation and the numbers reduce, I will agree that, well, if our numbers have gone down, let's go to the other side because we are in a minority. But you don't attempt to create a minority situation by way of interpretation. And I think that that is wrong. But again, is that what Ghanaians want to see of us? So me personally...
Is this too difficult for you to resolve among yourselves? Because
yes,
you are making it look like...
Exactly the question.
We have to sit you down and tell you what...
Exactly the question I want to ask. Is it too difficult for grown-ups like us to sit down and say, this is unnecessary. Let's continue with the work of Parliament to please Ghanaians, not to please ourselves as partisan persons.
That's the question I really am interested in your answer to.
I am not interested in the debate of who sits here, who sits there, or who does this, who hasn't done this, who hasn't done that. No, I'm not interested.
But with respect, that's why you're not sitting. That's why you didn't show up.
I am telling all of us that we are not behaving well. We are not being honorable as we call ourselves. If we can resolve this matter.
And that's the position of the Asante Akimnof NP, that's Andy Apiakubi, speaking on AppFront last night. But this is generating a lot of backlash as private legal practitioner Martin Pibb was also wading in, who says the majority is simply hiding behind the impasse to accuse the Speaker of wrongdoing when they are unable to whip up their numbers to prosecute the business of the day.
The bottom line is that they didn't have the numbers, so they sought something, a deflection, because they had to go in there, even if all of them didn't want to enter, so that maybe if there was a crowd, it could easily degenerate. They could have stood outside, then Apenu and maybe three of the other leaders would go with him, then they would make their representation. You think Apenu didn't know how to do this? And in actual fact, look, they could have stood as majority. They could have stood on the left side of the Speaker and so transacted business. What is it about sitting on the right? It's about the business, substance over form. But the reason they didn't do all of this is that they didn't have the numbers. So they sought to avoid an embarrassment. That's how come they created this whole confusion. The Speaker is not disobeying the Supreme Court decision. He is not. The NPP didn't have the numbers, and so they created this situation so that we will take attention from the fact that they can't marshal enough numbers.
And in the last few hours, a lot of developments coming across as we are learning of a grave implication for Ghana's economy with business of the House that's likely to grind to a halt, totally looking at just the number of days we have going into the 2024 general elections, yes. Less than 30 days, which means that by convention, some dramatic events may happen where Parliament would have to suspend for the elections to be carried out. I have a lot of people joining us and reacting to the stories even online. But first off, Kweku Asante, our parliamentary affairs correspondent, has been looking at all of the implications and the scenarios playing out ahead of that crucial recall, again, as a majority has signaled, of Parliament. But Kweku, this is not the first time. Yes. 3 times we recall that has happened in a row. So let's break it down. What inspired all of these recalls and what's likely to happen in the next few days?
So on the 31st of July, the Speaker of Parliament abruptly adjourned the House indefinitely. There were a number of business that the House was expecting to look at. The NPP side were not happy about that. They triggered a recall, the constitutional provision. The House did come to sit. They didn't do much of a business. But these disputes had not arisen. And then there was a substantive recall of Parliament in October 15th, when the Speaker did that on his own volition. And then these matter of these 4 MPs did come up. The majority side did not agree with some of the things the Speaker did. The Speaker obviously did declare 4 seats vacant. They went to the Supreme Court. And then there was another abrupt adjournment. And so if you add that of yesterday, there's been a lot of abrupt adjournment, and the NPP MPs have signaled that they are gathering signatures, and if by Monday they do not see some movement from the Speaker of Parliament, they will get to trigger that from the Speaker of Parliament. So we expect that by Monday, the NPP MPs would have filed a new constitutional request asking the Speaker to reconvene the House.
Yeah, but I mean, suffice to say that this is not a free pass for the majority or the NPP caucus, as some would describe them, of in Parliament.
Yes.
The concern is that they could recall up to a certain point, because by convention, the House may have to be suspended to allow the elections to go on.
Yes, definitely. Between 1992 and now, almost every time, between 2 and 3 weeks to the December 7th election, Parliament is hardly sitting because MPs, they themselves are in the thick of affairs. They are campaigning to return to the next Parliament. So that is something that we have seen in the last election cycles, that around December 7th, Parliament is not sitting. And if you look at, let's say Monday, MPs trigger this recall, the Speaker of Parliament has within 7 days to respond. And usually he will recall Parliament in another 7 days or 14 days. That takes you literally 1 week away from December 7th.
And
in the
clearly
week of
because we have 29 days to the election.
Exactly.
So if you're taking 14 out of this remainder,
it leaves you barely
of
2 weeks.
29.
And if the Speaker of Parliament decides to go for the higher side and use 14 days to recall, that could literally put you in 7 days away from the December 7th election. And yesterday I did speak to Ahmed Ibrahim, who was concerned that they in the NDC really are prioritizing this election. They are campaigning. They do not understand that the MPP MPs keep calling them here and there. And then the matter of the budget, Dr. Kassiel Atoforsen, the NDC group's leader, has told me at the last agenda date that he does not believe that they are really cause for alarm. And that if the House is unable to do this before December, they can come back and do it after the election. Because as we know it, unlike the budget itself, that the Constitution and the PFMA, I should say, actually has a specific date for which that budget must be presented. When it comes to the vote on account, the first quarter of the 2025 budget, they do not have that, and they can come back in 2025.
And this is what we need to stress, that this would be the last opportunity for Apenya Makin, who's seeking to hold on and clutch on strongly to his position as the majority in Parliament, because there's no clarity from the perspective of Parliament now as to who could lead government business. They claim that the reason why they're recalling the House is to resume work on some key interventions which will be necessary for government business to move on, including some crucial loans that ought to be passed.
There's a $350 million tax waivers, $250 million loan, all of them pending before the House currently. There's also the very controversial matter of the bauxite mining agreement, lithium mining agreement, all of that on the table, and there is really no end in sight for this impasse for the House to really get to the meat of those business.
Kweku Asante is our parliamentary affairs correspondent, but there's a raging question now tonight as to what the implication of all of this will be on the Ghanaian economy. I want us to go onto the telephone lines now and bring in Professor of Economics at the University of Ghana Business School, Professor Godfred Bokpin, who's joining us tonight on Top Story. Later on, zooming to Parliament and bringing some of the MPs who've also been holding some alternate views on this matter. But Prof, you've been listening to the drama unfold in Parliament, quite a number of divided opinions on this matter. But I want us to look at the impact, possible one, of course, on the Ghanaian economy. Crisis, some are describing it, but the Speaker says it's business as usual. Let's start off by looking at what will happen, the risk of not getting the first quarter budget, the 2025 budget, going through before the elections.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, and good evening to our cherished listeners. I think that when it comes to the expenditure in advance of appropriation for the first 3 months of 2025, I think there isn't really much of a cause for concern. We will get over that. Typically, we are looking at all of this being done and getting approval by resolution in accordance with Article 180 of the 1992 Constitution, as well as Section 23 of the Public Financial Management Act, and then the Standing Order of Parliament. So getting that approval by resolution, essentially by the 31st of December, will be much crucial. 4 years ago, by this time, for clarity, the expenditure in advance of appropriation was presented on the 28th of October by the then Honorable Ken Oforiatta on the authority of the President, as I said earlier, consistent with Article 180 of the 1992 Constitution, Section 23 of the Public Financial Management Act, and then the Standing Order of Parliament, which has been revised. I think then it was 145 or so. Yeah, so, but I think that beyond the fact that will scale this war, I think that it would have been helpful if Parliament was working and we had this done in time enough to also allow stakeholders to process that information. Because the reality is that the budget, or whether it's the vote on account or the expenditure in advance of appropriation, is not only just to enable the government to be able to withdraw from the consolidated fund to keep government machinery running for the first 3 months, or even for the full budget, which will come along with the Appropriation Act, which would enable the government to be able to spend. But the reality also is that the budget, the expenditure in advance of appropriation, also helps stakeholders to plan and see the direction government is going and all of that. So to that extent, the earlier it is presented, the better. But all this uncertainty overall does not help us. I was thinking that these developments are actually cornerstones for us to use to advance our democratic institutions, because without challenges like this, without infractions or differences like this, it will be difficult for us to see how we are maturing in our democratic process. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to rise above the waves and put the common interest above the self and party interest. What you see happening right now across the two main political divide is the situation where the MPs themselves are prioritizing their next 4 years in Parliament over the current business of government.
I see.
It's not just the minority that are looking at that, but if you look at the situation carefully, you realize that the MPP is rather struggling to get their members to the floor of Parliament. Their members are proud, especially if there is a sense.
Yeah.
There is a sense or a certain perception that the party may lose the next election. Then individual MPs will prioritize their seat over the party as a whole.
And Prof, that's an interesting perspective you're bringing on board, because the likely implication for the 2025 first quarter budget may not even be that of a budget that will go in for the next MPP administration, because we're going into an election. The likelihood of having an opposition party perhaps win the elections is what some are also looking at. So there might be some level of politicking going into that as well. And that's why I also want to hear from Ibrahim Murtala Mohammed, who's also joining the conversation tonight. Murtala Mohammed, the point about the implication of this budget is why many believe that beyond the number of the question of the numbers, I should say, pardon me for that, as to who constitutes majority or minority in the House, should be relegated to the background so we can clear the 2025 first quarter out of the way. Because what you'd likely have happening is that the NDC, which is canvassing for votes to lead the country in 2025, would have to work with the same framework. So are you willing perhaps to relegate the question of the numbers to the background, deal with the 2025 first quarter budget, and then we can get back to the debate? Hello, Murtala Mohammed. Murtala Mohammed, are you with us? Okay, we seem to have lost Murtala Mohammed there, but of course he belongs to the NDC caucus in Parliament. And Prof, that question cuts across board, isn't it? Even for the New Patriotic Party, which may still form the next government. If they do, they'll still have to work with the 2025 budget. So it will be in their interest now, isn't it, to just relegate that question of the numbers to the background and have a bipartisan support for this budget, isn't it?
I think that it's not even a regime-defining moment. Let me put it that way, because it's just for the first 3 months, right? And the next government will be able to put form a government and present the full-year budget and get the necessary appropriation bill passed into an appropriation act that would enable the government then to carry out its intentions in the budget. But I think what you see playing out here is that both parties know to a large extent that government machinery will not shut down in the first quarter of 2025. They know that, and even within the MPP, they know that after the election, they can easily come back and get this expenditure in advance of appropriation passed in accordance with Article 180 of the Constitution and Section 23 of the Public Financial Management Act. They know that they can scale that war. I think they are prioritizing the election, which is just around the corner, and all of that. Because in this country, once you lose everything, once power leaves you, everything leaves you, right? And the uncertainty may be high on the part of the MPP now, given the projections about Ghana's election and all of that. Of course, we know that it's not every projection that tends to work out. We saw the situation in the U.S. and all of that. But I think that the MPP will be much more mindful about, or MPs will be much more mindful about how they work this out and all of that. But I think beyond just the expenditure in advance of appropriation, there are also other important government business and all of that. But overall, I'm not too sure they think that there's considerable risk of government shutdown. But what we should be looking at is how, in all of this, how it helps us to consolidate our democratic credentials, how it helps to consolidate confidence in our economy, because this also adds to the uncertainty in the economy, and it may work to the disadvantage of the economy in the medium, in the short run.
Yeah.
Because if MPs themselves are prioritizing their parliamentary seat ahead of the common good of coming to parliament to do what has to happen, then you can imagine how ordinary Ghanaians will be prioritizing their interest ahead of the common interest.
So let me just...
And I've said that how we manage our election significantly undermines the fundamentals of the economy. It's very, very critical.
Yeah.
Because our election looks like it's war. To the extent that the U.S. will issue warnings and all kinds of threats.
Precisely.
And all of that. I think we need to demonstrate maturity. And I think at this stage it is also fair for me to humbly request the president to have some kind of background intervention in moderating the uncertainty.
And that uncertainty, we know, could affect issues of investment as well. And grateful that you're raising that point about what the MPs are prioritizing at this point. Ibrahim Mutala Mohammed is joining us. And I was asking you earlier, unfortunately we lost you on the line, as to if that's the situation, that most of you in Parliament are simply looking at retaining your seats instead of considering a bipartisan support for the 2025 first quarter budget, as Prof is raising. What's your take on that?
Well, Evans, I'm surprised many people are expressing shock about what is happening. This is not new in democratic governance. In the U.S. last year, the U.S. was more grievous than this. Did anybody describe the Senate and Congress as being childish? I mean, it helps make our democracy resilient. We need some of these things, and as a political science student, and if you ask those who are particularly interested in the geopolitics of this continent, they'll be happy to see some of these things happening. Nobody is doing anything untoward. These actions and events characterize democratic governance across the globe. The U.S. have experienced this, the United Kingdom have experienced this, and that is why I'm making reference to just last year. What happened in the United States of America? Did they say the heavens should get loose?
Yeah, but there's a price to pay. There's a price to pay for that, isn't it? And in our case,
there's always a price to pay for the defense of democratic governance, to ensure that people do not rabble-rouse what the Constitution and standing orders of Parliament says. So we will not compromise that. In any case, what is the problem? They have the rights to trigger what Article 1123 and Standing Order 53 of Parliament says. They can do that. And we have said repeatedly that any time they trigger that constitutional provision and the standing orders, we will come back to the House. But as far as we are concerned, we can't sit anywhere except where the majority sits. By the way, there isn't any
and that's
provision in the
what's been crowding the whole argument. The
That's
debate
right.
about the
Ivan.
just hold on for me. The question about the numbers. Are you willing to relegate that? Will you support just on a bipartisan basis without looking at who's majority in Parliament? Tacitly support the 2025 first quarter budget if Parliament is recalled, because this will be the last time, and we just have
Ivan,
some 7 days then
Ivan.
or 14 days to the elections.
Even the call that happened, it was called by the MPP caucus, the minority in Parliament. They triggered Article 1123 and Standing Orders 53 of Parliament. Your reporters were there. By 8:30, some of us were already seated. And even let me use myself as an example. You know, we're all campaigning in our constituencies. This is the harvesting season for our rights. I had to rush to my farm just to spend some few days and come back to the constituency. Because of this call, I traveled from the village to Tamale and left Tamale the same day because I knew that I am paid as a member of Parliament to work. I rushed to Parliament. By 8:30, I was in the chamber. We sat there up to 11 something. Mind you, Parliament starts at 10. The Speaker entered the chamber even after 10. And he adjourned Parliament 11 something. When the NPP caucus were not there. In any case, the business committee, they refused to attend. I heard Honorable Asenyo Martin saying that because the agenda was already known, they didn't need to sit. And I said that is the height of naivety as to why the business committee meets. The business committee is meant to build consensus so that both NDC and MPP, or the two halves, will agree on the agenda. And there have been instances where government business is brought and amendments are done at the business committee. And in fact, in some instances, complete things are taken up and new things are added. The business committee is also an opportunity for we, those who are not in leadership, to know the business of the House. And two, for the order paper to be written and presented or supplied to every single member of Parliament.
We're running out of time. The direct question, will you relegate the numbers to the background and support the passage of the 2025 first
You
quarter
don't
budget?
relegate the numbers. When you say relegate the numbers, what do you mean?
The debate about who's majority and support the 2025 first quarter budget. Will you do that?
We are going to Parliament per the Speaker's ruling and per convention. We sit at where we need to sit. The MPP is behaving like a child who is at his concrete operational stage of growth. Everything he is right and everybody is wrong. Where in the look,
Mutala, will you support the passage? I guess that's the question. We need to go.
It's not only the passage. There are several businesses that are supposed to be done.
Right.
And we have indicated time without number. We are willing to support government for this country to run. But they don't want to support themselves.
Right.
The majority leader doesn't have his numbers.
An interesting days coming up ahead. We look forward to that. Mutala Mohammed, Tamale Central MP, joining us on the telephone lines now. Interesting days ahead in Parliament. And also to you, Professor Godfred Bobkin, economist and professor at the University of Ghana Business School. My name is Bless Ogan. Up next is Ghana Connect with Kweku Asante.